the third thing, I mean, the different examples to show us why it's so important not to be talking just because they're in a coma. You keep them even more peaceful with lots of prayers, even more powerful then, you know. I remember even one time to another thing, this is a bit different, but it's similar. It's a bit similar, a bit different. Jeffrey Hopkins, you know, an American professor. He in '95, when I was editing our magazine, the Mandela magazine, and I interviewed him, he got Lyme's disease. And he got it. It's like you go to a coma. They didn't think he'd come alive again. He was completely in the deepest of a coma, and he said, "This is something. It is interesting. This one. This is different, but I like it." He said the only thing he could remember, he could pick up in his mind, was the Manjushri mantra. He said Ling Rinpoche told him, "Never forget this mantra." The only thing he could find in his mind was the Manjushri mantra. So have faith in the Buddhas, please. They're going to hang around. They die to help you. So that's why does the mouse, the cat, the ant, just saying the name Buddha can connect with their mind, It's very powerful. So, okay. And the other thing that I find very compelling, and this is most fascinating to think about when we think about the business of, because in the book, there's all the things, what to do the weeks and months before. We're going to go through these things. What to do the hours before, what to do at the time the breath stops, all these different things that the Lamas recommend. What to do the hours and the days after, up to 3 days, and then what to do when the mind leaves the body. And then that's the next 49 days, traditionally, isn't it? So, the scenario. So then there are the scenarios, what to do if your loved one dies at home, which is the best. Keep them for the 3 days, which is the traditional one. What to do if your loved one dies in hospital? That's a really tricky one because, unless you're rich, I said, they can't give you 3 days for that bed. They want your bed in half an hour, please. You may be having half an hour max before they want to take the body away. And that's really tricky, but we'll discuss it. But the next one is what to do if your loved one dies suddenly, which is difficult at home, drop dead in their soup or in a car accident. This is not easy because we all freak out easily. But the other one is most interesting, what to do if your loved one gives their organs. Now, I think I'll tell you about this now. This is most fascinating. I read this very wonderful book by an American medical journalist. He's very funny, very, very a good journalist. He says he's an atheist, but it's his book, he calls it The Undead, which is not about zombies. It's the whole thing that's now all the contradictions and problems that are coming up, especially in the United States. Now, all the contradictions and confusion about exactly when life and when death occur. And I think it's a great thing that is happening because now they're doubting their own views, So there's all these different chapters, and he's partly quite cynical about the business because they're the top dogs in the medical profession, aren't they? They're the most influential, they're the most elitist, they charge the most money, and they can be the most political as well. He's saying all this, it's very interesting. And he said, I really wish, because what happens is, you must know these things, I didn't know this before I read this book, that what happens is when they want your organs, they keep you, virtually what they mean, they keep you alive, they keep you breathing. So you're all warm and toasty, your heart's beating, your lungs are breathing, you look really nice and pink and fresh and delicious, or brown, whatever colour you are, Because what's happened is your gross consciousness has ceased, and as far as they're concerned, you're dead. So they keep the machines going to keep you alive and healthy. So as he said, I really wish they'd spend as much money on helping me be old and sick and dying as they do on keeping dead people alive because they want their nice fresh organs, I mean, it's very noble to give your organs, but it was very interesting looking at this. And then I asked Lama Zopa about this because all the Lamas I've ever talked to and all the teachers I've ever heard always say, wow, amazing. You couldn't wish to do a better thing than to give an organ because it's like the bodhisattva attitude. You're giving your body to somebody. So to die with that motivation, all the Lamas have always said how it's very special and you'll die well. But when Lama Zopa heard this, he didn't realise that they keep you alive and then they take you onto the operating table. And this is the doctor reported this. This is very interesting. There you are, your gross consciousness has ceased, okay, and they think you're dead. But the fact that your heart can keep beating, that your body can be still warm, and that your lungs can breathe, as Rinpoche said, of course that proves the mind has to be there. That means the subtle mind. The subtle mind. The person's still alive, in other words. It's not possible to have a dead piece of flesh be warm and breathing. Impossible. That means the subtle consciousness is there because by keeping you breathing, they prevent your consciousness from leaving the body, basically. So you are a live person. Of course, you won't feel anything because your gross consciousness has ceased. It's like you're under anesthetic. You can't feel anything. But this is what the interesting point, and this is my way of thinking about it. You listen to what I'm saying. So what happened is he reported one of these, when they bring this dead woman, she's not dead, but she's, they think she's dead. They bring her to the operating table. Of course, they don't give her anesthetic because as far as they're concerned, she's dead. And the nurse watching the machine with the heartbeats of this woman, when they got the circular saw to cut her from top to bottom, to open her up, to pluck out all her toasty organs, her heart went from 100 beats to 200 beats a minute. And as the author said, I wonder what a dead person's heart has got to be concerned about, Now, isn't that interesting? Now, I want to try and explain it from what I understand. As Lama Zopa said, I told him this thing. He says, well, it's really quite difficult. The yogis should talk about this because the person's alive, there's no question. On the one hand, they won't feel it because their gross consciousness has ceased. But this experience he had a whole chapter of people who leave their bodies, everybody. This is reported in all cultures now. But of course, the materialists are so cynical about it. They just don't accept. Because they know the brain's not leaving the body, so they don't refuse to accept there's any other component there. So they just think these people are stupid, And this interesting doctor, this guy who wrote the book, was very fascinating. He had a whole chapter of different people's experiences, and one was really interesting. One woman who had to have a really radical procedure. So radical that they virtually had to make her dead, stop all the vital organs because it was such a sensitive procedure. So from their point of view, no way she could feel anything. But she reported the most vivid, the top best class, he said, most vivid out-of-body experience, quoting exactly what they said, the instruments they used, everything, and they couldn't argue with it. In fact, I just heard recently that somebody who left her body while she was being operated on, she heard all their conversations and the horrible things they were saying, and she sued and won. I heard that. Whether that's a rumour and a joke, I don't know. Isn't that interesting? But this woman, they can't explain it. Of course they can't, because they're so stubborn. They think it's their brain, So one doctor was quoted in this book, hearing all these different things, all these contradictions and problems that are coming up now, which is great. He said, I can say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but that much I can say. So isn't that good? Fantastic. And that's why it's amazing all these conferences His Holiness is having all these last 30, 40 years, Unbelievable. His enormous humility and kindness, discussing with all the scientists. So now they're opening their minds to these, to the Buddhist teachings. It's incredible. And this understanding of what life and death is. So this one of giving organs is really, since that time, I had on my license in Australia, I think forget it. I can keep my organs to myself. Yes?
Well, two thoughts. By deciding as part of one's bodhisattva vows that you want to give your organs, and therefore at that time, even though you don't feel it physically, but your subtle consciousness is aware.
I don't think your subtle consciousness. Well, no, it depends. Go on, say what you're saying.
Well, I'm saying that it's like you're doing something that you don't mind, you're willing to do whatever that suffering is to your consciousness.
I don't think we think like that. We think, if we're all materialists and we're giving up, most people who offer their organs just have the materialist view. They think that they're dead when they take their organs. They're not going to think they're thinking anything. It's interesting. Rinpoche still said, when he heard this, he still said they won't feel anything. But he still said, but their motivation is powerful enough to make the death worthwhile. But another Lama I asked, and I couldn't put it into Lama Zopa's book because this Lama is not his book, but I think I agree with this other Lama. He said, what if you gave your organs decided 20 years ago, and now you die? He didn't say this, but I'm thinking this. What if now you're an all sad old alcoholic who's neurotic and angry and demented? The fact that you thought your organs 20 years ago, now you're dying a terrible death, I can't see it's going to be so much benefit. It doesn't follow that you're going to have a virtuous mind before you die. So it's just tricky though, because the point is, of course you realise, my feeling about that woman, this is my only thought, based on the things I've heard about that man, the 25-year guy, my own dream, that time when I was vividly conscious, people, my friend Judy, hearing things at a deeper level, but being vividly conscious especially, that I think that woman, we can deduce, she couldn't feel it, But maybe her consciousness, like so many people, was floating above her body, and because she's not dead yet, she still identifies with that body being her. You understand my point? But she's observing them cutting her body from top to bottom, and because the consciousness is actually in the body still, well, her physical heart, would indeed go from 100 to 200 beats. So I think that'd be a horrible way to die. They're going to cut you open and rip out your organs, and then literally killing you at that point. That's called killing. It's actually murder, if you think of it technically using this view. Do you see my point? So you've got to be a pretty high being, I'd suggest, to really see yourself having your body cut from top to bottom and relax about it. My goodness, you're a great yogi if that happens, honey. You see my point?
Absolutely. My brother's a surgeon. He says he will not be an organ donor because they won't make efforts for you to live when they see that
because they want your organs. So I know, in all the awful stories this journalist was writing about this young Italian boy, you know, they had his liver and his kidney. They couldn't wait, and they had to sew them back in because mummy and daddy refused to give them. I mean, the things like this, really wicked, actually, very naughty. It's true, and of course it's talked about in such a noble way. You can't argue. It seems so noble, but of course these awful ego people, naturally, and we're human beings, and they're the top dogs. They're the highest fees, the most elitist, the most influential, and of course they're going to use their power. And so this is why this book was so fascinating. And he's a very reasonable journalist. Dick Teresi, I think his name is. The book's called The Undead.
So this is a very interesting perspective because I've never thought of it like this.
Yeah. Are you a medical person?
I am a medical
Okay.
person.
Yeah.
I do think they do try to take safeguards.
Yeah, I know, I'm exaggerating a bit. I can't say everybody is horrible, but it was just this book was very fascinating. But this Buddhist view is interesting. You've got to admit it's an interesting point, isn't it?
And the reason that we are taught some people come to know what was said in the OR while they were under surgery is probably because it doesn't fully explain it, I agree, but probably because they are not given adequate anesthesia.
No, that's the materialist view would say that naturally. But if we take this view as our hypothesis here, that we do have a subtle consciousness that doesn't depend upon the brain.
Yes, so
but you understand that point, don't
yes,
you?
When we take that view, then it behooves us
of course.
as people who are working in the
Precisely.
OR to be much more respectful.
Precisely, exactly. And that's why this is a really interesting view, even if you're not a Buddhist, to at least respect that, you know.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I agree. No, it's just fascinating. So you work in the.
I don't see patients directly anymore.
I see.
But I'm a trained
Yeah,
medical.
I understand. But it is interesting, isn't it? And I think what was interesting, this fellow, this journalist, he did a lot of research in every religion, but he didn't seem to ever meet Tibetan Buddhists, which is a great pity because they've even got these very nice explanations. Maybe he didn't, but he didn't have any explanations for it. He's a very funny fellow. I really enjoyed his writing was excellent. Anyway, where were we? But the dream consciousness is the subtle consciousness, and that's the one that's in a coma. That's the one that, you know, we'd say a coma when your grosser consciousness has ceased. You know, it's basically your subtle consciousness, and that level of consciousness is what dreams. So we can see some people during their operations, they don't leave their bodies and float above their head, you know, float above. That's how the people all commonly express it. And even people who've had a lot of traumatic things happen to them. I remember a friend of mine in Australia who was raped repeatedly by her father, by neighbours. It was just hideous, you know, even by animals, being gross here. It's this little tiny girl. She didn't really ever get angry, but her way of coping was to leave her body. She'd be up above her body and like with the fairies, you know, describing this little body being abused down there, knowing she'd have to go back to it. That's a very common experience, but this is how it fits with this particular description. It's your subtle consciousness. Lots and lots of people reporting this type of experience, and that's how it's described in the Buddhist view. It's what's called your subtle consciousness, which is the same as your dream consciousness. And that one experience I had during my retreat, that was my dream consciousness, these vivid, vivid dreams, but my grosser consciousness was completely clear. I heard things, you know, didn't see, but I heard everything that went on. So it's kind of interesting. So any questions before we 7 o'clock? So I think I'll go through this 8 stages of death. It sounds a bit abstract sometimes but it's just interesting, I think, to go through these stages. Then we can have some discussion about it. Okay, so this is what happens. Yes. Yeah, a bit loud.
I have a question. Okay, so I'm in the process of dying. I've gone beyond the 4th stage. now my organs are being harvested, for example, for to use somebody else. I can never come back to life, right? I mean, it's not a
that is one of the points. Okay, one of the points is that people do. There are reports all over the world of people so-called coming back to life after you've been called dead, because the Buddhist view would say your gross consciousness has ceased. But it is possible. We hear about stories, people knocking on the coffins and things, and of course that can't be explained if we only talk about the brain. But if we talk about this view, it makes complete sense. And that's why also, as Rinpoche says, until you're really certain that person actually, their consciousness has left the body, and I'm going to describe it, then you can't be certain that they haven't, their karma hasn't finished, that they can still come back to life, But once the organs are taken out, obviously you can't. That's clear. But that's why that's so scary. That point is very clear. That if your subtle consciousness is still in the body, which it has to be, if you're warm and toasty and your heart's beating and your lungs are working and your body's warm, then that's by definition your subtle consciousness is still there and it won't leave until you stop the machines. So virtually they're killing a person. It is killing. It technically is killing. Do you hear that? Can you accept that point?
So,
Do you hear? Yeah, you're gone.
when does this
Consciousness
subtle
leave.
consciousness...
Yeah, I'm going to describe it. I'm describing it now. We'll go through it. Yeah, we'll go through it. And there's a fairly easy way to prove it, according to this discussion. We'll discuss.
But there's no way to know when it's really gone.
Yes, it is. That's what I'm saying. There is. Easy. It's not a problem. It's not a difficult point at all. Taking this model, is clear. Okay, I'll just read Rinpoche's things, really. So even though we will go through the 8 stages at the time of death, what I'm describing here is a gradual death. This is page 28, chapter 6. This is from Rinpoche's book. So those who die violently or suddenly, they go through the stages very quickly. So I figure it's a bit like if you walk down 20 flights of stairs, or you can fall down. It's the same. You go through the same stages, but one is much quicker than the other. You understand? So you still go through these stages, natural, but there's no space and time for it. It happens very quickly. As I mentioned, the great meditators, those who have deeply familiarized themselves with these stages in meditation during their lives, they can recognize these stages of death as they occur and can meditate on emptiness throughout. But ordinary people don't recognize them. It's the same at death. We don't recognize the visions. They talk about these visions. Each of these stages is described in terms of a certain vision that occurs. We're not familiar with this. And we can prove we're not familiar with this because we sleep every night. But who goes through the 8 stages of sleep, which is the same as death? Suddenly you wake up 8 hours later. What happened, There's no awareness. That's why it's not an easy thing. The great yogis can do it because they control their minds and have got concentration. So they can be literally conscious as their mind is getting subtler and subtler. They literally stay conscious at an ever more subtle level, That's the greatest meditators, and that's the ideal scenario is that. Because your subtler level of consciousness is far more potent and capable of realizing emptiness and getting out of samsara. Those words. We can go into this. So it's the same at death. We don't recognize the visions that occur at each stage of this evolution because of the pollution of our ignorance and our uncontrolled mind. And we haven't practiced, basically. So even though we might know these stages intellectually, not having trained our minds in the meditation techniques during our lifetime and not having created enough virtuous karma or purified our minds, we can't recognize these experiences as they occur. But it's possible. So it's good to help your loved one meditate on these stages during the months and weeks before death. When we get to the different practices, there's what to do, all the kinds of practices Rinpoche recommends that we can do at the different stages, what to think about, what to talk about, what to meditate on, all these different things. We'll go through these. So it's good, and if they have a highest tantra practice, you can guide them through these stages of meditation when you help them with their daily practices. So the first stages is when your gross consciousness and your gross body cease to function. It's like this gradual deconstruction of these various components. So, the key thing, it sounds a bit abstract, but the key thing to understand is here, at the 4 elements. This is how they talk. 1,000 years ago in our medical systems we talked about the elements. Now we don't in our modern world, obviously, But this is still the model that's used. This is still the model that's used in Tibetan medicine. It's still the model that's used in the Chinese system, in your Indian healing systems. We know that. So all these different ways of seeing what a person is and what we're made up of, you know. So the key thing is the earth element ceases. And the indicator of this is that you feel like you're sinking, you know. I mean, you know, or your body feels very heavy. Look when you're tired. You know, this is exactly what happens when you're sleeping. Look when you're tired. Your body's like lead, isn't it? And look when you wake up in the morning, your body's like lead. Because your earth element hasn't come fully back yet. You know when people, like, you see that in the movies, and they try to keep a person who's overdosed. They try to walk them up and down the room. Don't fall down. Don't go to sleep. Because you've got to keep the elements. This is how they talk. Your elements got to keep functioning. The earth element. Because otherwise, you know how inexorable sleep is. You know when you're driving and you start to fall asleep, you can't stop this powerful, inexorable thing of falling into sleep. And your eyes, you can hardly keep them open. You can't. We can see that. That's how they describe these elements are ceasing to function, ceasing to do their job. You know, that's the way they describe. So the first is the earth. The main one in here is the earth element, and then secondly, your eye consciousness. Look when what's your name? Sunali. Yeah. Let's say Sunali and I are having a chat, and I'm tired. And I'm exhausted. We have this experience. And I'm looking at her. And I'm struggling to stay awake. My eyes are open, but I can't see anything. We all have this experience. Because they talk about beginning to sink, to go in, this capacity for cognition, you know. And the earth element, your body becomes heavy. There's other things that occur too, that they talk about. These things always sound abstract, but trying to make them simple. There's 5 different, what they call 5 wisdoms. It's just different ways the mind functions in day-to-day life. So one of them is this capacity of the consciousness to, through our eye consciousness, to cognize a lot of things all at once. Now look what happens, we're wide awake now. Just by looking here, a million things are all occurring. We can see them all crystal clear. Lights, this, that, colour, blue, blah, people, cushions. You can see crystal clear. Many phenomena are appearing. They call this the mirror-like wisdom. But as you start to sleep, I'm talking to Sonali. You know, you can hardly hold any information, can you? Your eyes are struggling to stay up. And then you're heavy. We have this experience. The elements are ceasing. The eye consciousness is ceasing. This capacity to hold a lot of information is ceasing. Then they talk about, the last thing is this vision. I mean, none of us has this. But this is what occurs. And it seems like this first one, they talk about a mirror, it's like a mirage. Well, you think about it, the earth element is ceasing to function, which now means the water element is prevailing. Well, what is a mirage? Interplay of earth and water, isn't it? So it's a subtle thing. The meditators can see this. And they know what stages they're at in this process because they've been practicing all their lives, you know. The next one, and this is probably, like I said, it's hard to know. This is starting maybe a couple of hours before you stop breathing. You know. Rinpoche says here, if your eyes are open and they will remain like that, then this is a sign you'll be stopping breathing in a couple of hours. If people are familiar with, I mean, you must be familiar with dying people, no? No?
It's never taught in such detail.
No, of course it's not. I know, of course it's not. I know, I understand that. But you notice that people are dying. Well, that's a sign they'll be dead in a couple of hours. According to Rinpoche, according to these yogis. This is, you know, this is the nearest sign of death, he said. This is what happens.
Eyes stay open.
Yes, if your eyes are already open, they'll stay open. Clearly, many people have their eyes closed. So you can't say, you know.
So there's no blinking.
That's right, precisely. No blinking, exactly. So this is what happened with Lama Yeshe during the last couple of hours before he passed away. He wasn't able to close his eyes. And I've seen it in other dying people. So roughly that. So the next stage, now the capacity to experience the difference between pleasure, pain and indifference. It kind of merges, you know. They call this the mirror, never mind, keep it simple. The mirror, the wisdom of equanimity, whatever. The next one is the water element. All the liquids begin to dry up, you know. And equally, conversely, when you wake up in the morning, your eyes are dry, right? You want to drink because the water element hasn't come quite back yet. You could say it like that. You know? I remember one time too, when I had a very terrifying dream one time, and I woke up really suddenly. I couldn't move my body. That's because the earth element hasn't come back to function properly yet. This is the way, this model, how it describes it. We have that experience. And your ear consciousness goes. There I am talking to Sonali, and I just missed the last 10 seconds, and I'm embarrassed. We all have that experience. because we're going to sleep. You're still sitting up, aren't you? At some point, boom, over, crash. And then here they talk about then the next vision, as they describe it, is like, you could say it's like the interplay of water and the next element, which is the fire element, the heat in the body. So it's like this, they talk about like a smoke, like Rinpoche says is the vision, like a room filled with incense or smoke from burning green wood swirling about. So now at this point, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, your dying thoughts activate the karma that will be the cause of your next rebirth. And the activators of this throwing karma, they call it, are the 8th and, we discussed this a bit before, remember the 8th and 9th links, craving and grasping. So at this point it's extremely important, or it's important to be able to control the arising of all your disturbing emotions and thought. This is why this is the point when your mummy and your daddy and your dog and your mouse need you most. If your last gross, they talk about the last gross thoughts at this point, when you can still put 2 and 2 together, are virtuous. This is like a technical thing. This will trigger one of these karmic seeds. So this karmic seed business, it's Buddha's basically, we mentioned last night, but this is a fundamental, it's a good thing to understand, the Buddha's view. Every millisecond, of whatever we think, see, hear, touch, smell, taste, feel, whatever, goes on in our consciousness without any awareness of it, but our mind is constantly going. All of this is constantly the process of, quote unquote, creating karma. What it means is all of this energy doesn't go astray. We in our culture think thoughts don't count. What goes on in the mind is my private business and it doesn't have any effect. But the Buddha's view is every millisecond of every thought is like this constant process of creating karma, which means sowing seeds, leaving impressions, programming our mind. It's the only way to say it. So nothing goes astray. So if everything we're thinking and doing and saying is sort of, I use the analogy, it's just my analogy, obviously Buddha doesn't use this one, like dropping little seeds into our bank vaults. This is my saying, okay? So at the time of death, we've got these trillions of karmic seeds, not just from this life. Buddha's view is not just this life, Let's take this as our hypothesis here. There's billions of karmic seeds. So the main bank vault, if you like, is the seeds that will be producing an actual life. We discussed it briefly yesterday. There are 4 ways our karma ripens. One is the type of rebirth we get. That's the main one that determines. So in our case, we can deduce logically that at the time of our past death, one of our virtuous, very powerful morality karmic seeds, practiced, as Lama Zopa says, probably in the context of practicing a spiritual path, was triggered. A morality karmic seed of non-harming or non-killing, nourished by spiritual practice. That is the cause of our being programmed to go to our mummy's human womb several weeks later. A virtuous karmic seed was triggered. And that will happen when the mind is peaceful at the time of death. That's the point. If the mind's freaking out, which is so common, not uncommon, this can trigger one of our negative seeds, which will throw us into the dog's womb or a worse kind of rebirth. This is how they describe it. And of course it's dealt with in great depth and much more technical explanations. It's all there, but just the general principles here, Not yet. We just finished the process and we can have questions. Is that okay? Thank you, Noel. So basically at this point is when it's this dangerous time, when this intense grasping arises, when there's a lot of fear, a lot of clinging, a lot of fear, even if you're a practitioner, because your mind's getting more sensitive, you're losing the plot, you can't put 2 and 2 together anymore. So this is why the conducive environment is so necessary. Peaceful, virtuous. If you're a Buddhist, you want to hear your own Lama's voice, I want to hear my Lama's teachings, I want my friends to be saying my prayers, whatever's appropriate for that person, so that you can go through this intense process with a peaceful, virtuous mind, because that's what triggers the virtuous karmic seed at about this point. And that's why they generally say, traditionally in the teachings, they state it a certain way. Clearly every situation is slightly different, but you've got to present the theories of it. So in general they say, and I've heard many, some people, a friend of mine is a nun who works in Australia with the dying. And she said one fellow, she'd never seen anything like it, the horror that he went through. It was like he was having these monstrous visions, these hallucinations. He was like, he turned almost like a demon. His eyes were rolling up, they were red. He was raging like a maniac. Well, this is a typical indication from the Buddha's point of view that he's dying in this, he's through the death process and a negative seed has been triggered. And because your mind is getting more subtle, you're literally seeing your future lives. And this means for him like an intensely suffering life. You hear many, all the stories we hear about people who have near-death experiences. And mostly they're the white light experiences. Well, I remember, it's very fascinating actually. I remember years ago on the internet seeing a movie that's this American doctor. He interviewed several of his patients who had had near-death experiences, but they were hell-like. Because of course many people don't like to hear about these ones, and we just think it's all white light and lovely, So it's very fascinating. I'll tell you, it's two different stories. Take it, do what you like with it. But this is the point here, right? The Buddhist view. Your gross consciousness is, you're moving from the grosser level to like your dream state, which is your subtle consciousness. And some people have very vivid access to their dream mind. Some of you people in this room might, Some people just go to sleep and never remember any dreams at all. Very different times in our lives. But that's just subtle consciousness. And because death is this gradual ceasing of the grosser, it's like you're getting more subtle. So your cognition is becoming more subtle. It's like you're getting clairvoyant, because your subtle consciousness is what's capable of clairvoyance. Literally clairvoyance. This is from the Hindu teachings. It's thousands of years old. The Buddha says we've all had clairvoyance in countless lives. Through concentration meditation, we've literally gone from the grosser level consciously to a subtler level. And that level of mind has the capability to cognize phenomena that our gross consciousness can't. And that's our subtle consciousness. That's why so many people report kind of vivid things in their dreams of clairvoyance and seeing the future, remembering the past. But people feel weird about it because they don't understand. But this fits exactly with the Buddhist view. Because you're moving towards your subtle consciousness. So, that if the negative seed's already been triggered, which is going to cause you to be an animal or something, then it's a pretty terrifying experience. They say like this. But if it's a virtuous seed, they say death is a blissful experience, literally blissful experience. So I'll tell you these two things about this doctor, but I'll tell you another one as well. Steve Jobs. I love Steve Jobs, okay? The Apple guy, I read his biography, and I heard from his sister, they'd been adopted, and they met later in life. And then she went there the day he died. It was this wonderful story. And I saw he knew he was dying, and so he was a very practical fellow. People said he was a Buddhist. I'm not sure if he was, actually. But he confronted death. He was accepting impermanence, really. It was a very wonderful fellow in many ways. So his sister said she got there that day, and he was on the bed, this liver disease, or his pancreas cancer, he was skinny as a rake. And his two daughters were there. So let's just say, what's your name? Abhijit. There's Abhijit. Pretend that's Steve Jobs. I'm the sister. He's there. His two daughters are right in front of him. And he's looking, she said, with incredible love into his daughters' faces, begging them to forgive him for leaving them. In other words, he wasn't freaking out and clinging to them, But he was full of love, she said. And then she said, he looked over their shoulder into the distance and he went, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. And then he died. I think it's the most gorgeous story, It's like, whatever. Let's hope it wasn't a God realm. Let's hope it was a Pure Lands. But this is what they talk about. When people are very virtuous and they die, it's like they're seeing, people talk like this. Because their mind is going from the grosser level to the subtler, which is more powerful, more potent and more capable, and can see and cognize phenomena that the gross consciousness can't. This is just fitting with this model completely. So and that's a sign, the way you die before you stop breathing is usually an indicator of the type of rebirth you're going to have, Rinpoche never gives up. He says, always practice as you can do to help them shift direction from the lower realms to the upper realms. He says like that. All the books, all the practices are in the book, So this point, that point is,
which book?
This book of Rinpoche's, okay, this book the notes we've got here, did you get some notes? Is taken from this book of Rinpoche's, and here if you look on page 2 you'll see how you can download it as a PDF. It's actually available from Wisdom Publications, a different version of it, but that's like $80 US. So I'm giving you a free version, which is the one I edited. I edited this book, and it's a PDF though, but you can read it on your book thing. Anyway, it's right there. How to edit, how to download it. Okay. And what it is this. This is the first section. It's only about 150 pages, the background and what to do when. Then all the practices themselves is about 250 pages. They're all at the back, so you can select those. The advice is all through the rest of the book. You understand? It's a very helpful book. I was very grateful to edit it. It really helped me, So this is the point. Before you stop breathing, they say the karma's already determined. You're on your way to your new mother's womb. In our case, let's say. So the next stage is the third one, and this is, they talk about this vision of the fire spark. So this is now the fire element is prevailing. Your hearing has got you're going, the eyes are going, it's gradually ceasing, You can't put two and two together by now, you can't tell the difference between all the many things, you can't distinguish between pleasure, pain and indifference. Now you can't even distinguish between enemies, friends and strangers. Maybe your ugly old aunties on the left and your gorgeous beloved boys on the right, you can't tell the difference. You're losing the plot fast. You can't distinguish, okay? Your heat, the heat in the body begins to, leave. And often this is when people are very cold, ask for more blankets. Your nose ceases, nose consciousness. And your, they say this vision now of sparks. This is really only evident to the yogis. Most people, it happens every time we sleep. But who's ever noticed these visions? Not one of us, Some of you might. So now they also say the way the heat leaves your body can be an indicator of your rebirth. Not that you can do much about it by this point, I don't think. Maybe you can, but I don't know. But they say because gradually all the energies coming from below up to the heart chakra and down to the heart chakra. So if you notice. And it's best not to touch the body anyway, but if you do notice your loved one's head is still toasty, but their feet are cold, that's a good sign. It means the consciousness, but if your feet are all warm and toasty and your head's cold, that is not a good sign. Not that I think you can do much about it at this point. Put a hot water bottle on their head or something. I don't know. But they say all this, okay? So now, the next is the fourth, the vision of what they call a flame. So by this point, your ears are gone, you're virtually going, your eyes are gone, you can't put two and two together, can't remember pleasure, pain and indifference, you can't tell the difference between your friends, enemies and strangers, you can't hold a lot of information all at once, you're literally deconstructing, all the bits are falling away, And by this point, the breath, and I've heard all sorts of stories about this, people breathe for hours, really strong, I don't know, I've heard all kinds of stories, but they just tell it simply here. Your breath, goes out and eventually it doesn't go in. So your tongue turns blue at the root, apparently. I don't know these things. I've never seen a dead person's tongue. But I always quote one of my lamas, Geshe Rabchen. He said, that tongue that has spent its life gossiping is now useless. I like that. So then the ability now to even know who you are, this is now gone. We just hear, right now we think of ourselves, we have this vision of an entire world, my life, who I am, I'm Australian, I'm this, I'm that age, I do this real big, massive story we have of who we are and where we fit in the world. You can't think of it. You hear a word, you can't give meaning to it. You've lost the plot by this point. And you stop breathing. But you're not dead yet. So now they describe these next four stages, and they all sound very abstract to us, of course, because it's not the way we think, but I'll just go through it briefly, okay? So they say, it's just subtle consciousness. So now they say, in much more detail, like some of the other books, there's another book that was published 35 years ago, edited by Jeffrey Hopkins, by Lati Rinpoche, and it's called Death, Intermediate State and Rebirth, which gives a detailed description of this next stage, of all these 80 different states of mind that gradually cease at a subtler level. But this is not described here, and it's interesting if one wants to study it in more detail. So these 80 different states of mind start to all go, ceasing to function. But again, we're not conscious of all this, But basically what happens in the physical level, there's this red and white, like I mentioned before, the red and white drops, or the red and white kundalini they call it, the energy from the mother and the father, because we started at the heart chakra. This energy, this subtle liquid energy and the heat energy are through all the different channels, it seems. But predominantly they talk about the white one being here, the crown chakra, and this is the source of the pleasure and joy we feel in our bodies, you know. Then you've got the red one, which is predominantly at the navel chakra, and they say this is the source of the heat in the body. So now what happens gradually is all the energy's gone into the central channel, the state of mind, and the winds have gone into the central channel. So now this white kundalini melts down the central channel, and at this point this is like, they sort of like a vision, like a white sky. That's how they describe it. Again, we're not conscious, you know this. You know, the winds in the right and left channels move down and open this. No, this is the red one, sorry. The winds in the right and left channels move up and open the head chakra, loosening the knots there, and then everything enters into the central channel. This causes the white bodhicitta at the crown to melt and flow down the central channel to the heart, touching the central channel as it goes. Now you experience the white vision, the mind of white appear, like very bright moonlight in autumn, or like the almost white sky caused by the light of the rising moon when everything is covered with snow. The red one, the winds in the right and left channels move down and open the sex and navel chakras, loosening the knots there and enter the central channel. This causes the red bodhicitta from the navel to go up the central channel to the heart chakra. And now you experience the red vision, the mind of red increase. It's like the clear red sky just before the dawn breaks, or like a copper red reflection in the sky. And now finally the seventh one is called the dark vision. The red and white bodhicitta, there's two drops coming from originally from the mother that are also in your body, come and meet now at the heart chakra, at the indestructible drop. And now they come together and you experience the dark vision, the mind. So this is if you're falling into darkness, or like a dark and empty sky, or being in a dark room. These visions are all experienced by the yogis. We can just have to, often they do this as a meditation to become familiar with this process, in the hope that when you do die, you might just get a glimpse, you know, oh, it's happening, oh, great, you know. So the yogis continue to meditate now. Oh, no, sorry, next one. And now the extremely subtle consciousness. This is the 8th stage, the subtlest. This is the subtlest level of this life. Now the clear light vision appears. This is the subtlest level of mind, occurring only after all the grosser consciousnesses have ceased. It's like an autumn dawn, when the sky is so clear, no clouds, no dust. It's not bright like at noon, not red and not dark. Nothing else appears. The yogis continue to meditate at this point and can stay as long as they like. For ordinary people who have no awareness of what is happening, it could be 3 days before the mind leaves the body. So now, how the mind leaves the body at the time of death. So death occurs when this indestructible drop splits open, and the extremely subtle mind, or the clear light mind, and the wind it's connected to inextricably, leave your heart chakra in the central channel, and depending on which rebirth you will take, exit the body at one point or another. So you're going to be born in what they call a pure land of the Buddha, and I'm going to describe this later in the week or the weekend. We're going to go through all this again. I don't know who's going to come at the weekend, but we'll see what happens. We're going to go through all this. If you're going to be reborn in a pure land, which of course is the best birth to get, that's, your conscious will leave through the crown chakra. If you're going to be born as a human, your eyes will leave through the eyes. If you be born as a hungry ghost, which is not a cool rebirth, I promise, spirit, you leave through the mouth. If you're going to be born in the hell realms, the anus or the sex organ, I can't remember which. If you're going to be born as an animal, through the anus. And from the sex organ, if you're going to be born in the hells, your consciousness leaves through the anus. If you're going to be born as an animal, it'll leave through the sex organ. Okay, like that. That's what they say. So now, when the mind leaves the body of a man, the white bodhicitta continues, it comes from the crown, it continues down the central channel and leaves through the sex organ. And the red goes up and leaves through the nostrils. And it's the other way around for a female, apparently. So this is one of the indicators that the mind has actually left the body. But it must be a bit tricky to discover this. If there's lots of other yuck and liquid coming out, it's quite hard to distinguish. But people say it is visible. That's one way to discover the mind has left the body. But there's an even easier way. This apparently is foolproof. As long as the consciousness is there, like I said before, everything has gathered to the heart chakra. Everything is here. The rest of the body will be freezing cold, like it would be. But if you put your hand above the heart chakra, this is in your mouse, on a dog, it's the same. You put your hand above the heart chakra, don't touch the skin, it'll be vividly warm. And that's the sign the mind is still there. When it's cold there, you know the mind has left. Now, I speak to lots of people who work with the dying, and they mightn't talk about a mind, they talk about the spirit or the soul, you know. They often say you just know when the person's dead. They say like that. But this is a way you can be certain, apparently. Because as long as the consciousness is there, you feel above there it's going to be warm. So this is where a problem comes, because if you've got it in a hospital and then you can't have 3 days, you haven't got the luxury of 3 days, and they're going to start taking the body and messing with it, and it's best not to touch it. There are things you can do to help the consciousness leave. But what's interesting, you know, we'll go to that, we'll get that eventually when we start talking about where your loved one dies.